So let's say you're working at a firm and you're thinking of switching from one firm size to another. For example, you're working at a small firm and you're thinking of switching over to a bigger one or vice versa. What is the right answer? Maybe you're not even working yet. Maybe you're thinking of getting your first job. How does that compare to working on your own and owning your own firm? What should you do? Well, right off the bat, I'll be honest, I've never worked at one of these really large, like 200 people plus firm. The biggest firm I ever worked at was around 40, 50 employees. So that's like a medium sized firm. And I also work at a very small firm. And then finally, now I own my own company. So, what I want to talk about is kind of the pros and cons of each and what you should do. So, let's start out with someone who's never worked before, maybe a student, or maybe someone that is just thinking of getting their first job in general. My advice is always to start out with a small firm if you're brand new to the career. The thing about a small firm is that it's going to give you the access to understanding or having a better understanding of what entails the architecture career, right? And what I mean by that is that when you're working at a small firms have to do pretty much everything. They have to figure out how to get their own clients, they have to set up their own contracts, and then eventually they have to do the work themselves. And you're exposed to everything at a small firm because at a small firm, it's probably just 3 or 4 of you guys, and you're seeing what the principals are doing. You have access to ask them, hey, why are you going after this project? How are you going after this kind of project? And these kind of firms, they tend to be more ambitious. So they also have the ability to be more flexible with your compensation. Now, it's funny because you would think that a small firm doesn't have enough resources to compensate you more. And you might be true, but you'd be surprised to find out that a lot of times small firms, they don't have as much overhead as big firms. And also they don't really have their systems in place or as well defined as bigger firms do. So you're able to negotiate way more with a smaller firm than a bigger firm. So when you're just starting out, working at a small firm might actually get you more compensation. It might not give you all the benefits, right? So you might not have things like 401k or health insurance or things like this. Might not, right? You might be able to find small firms that offer these benefits, but at the very least, you'll be able to negotiate your compensation as you get, better at your job. Now, another thing is, like I said before, the invaluable information of being able to be very close to the business owners and have conversations with them pretty much on the daily, asking them why and how are they doing specific things, right? So you can ask them things like, if you have a question on of detailing, you can sit down with the owners and say, how would you do this and why would you do this and why is this building assembled this way, so on and so forth. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to start at a small firm, guys. You start at a big firm or at a medium-sized firm, it's going to be very helpful. The thing is that the bigger the firm, the more structured these firms are. They already have specific roles. So when you get hired, you're going to be hired to do like one specific thing at a bigger firm. So that's my advice. If you're starting out, start out with a small firm, learn as much as you can. And something that you guys want to think about is if you right off the get-go land in a firm that you're very happy with, then by all means you can stay there, stay working there, continue to grow in that company. But be very aware, have open conversations with other colleagues in other companies, see what they're up to, what kind of projects are they working on, etc. Because the last thing you want to do is to get pigeonholed into your role. And this could happen anywhere. It could happen at a small firm, at a big firm, it could happen anywhere. So you got to be very careful about this. You don't want to be doing the same tasks over and over and over for more than like a couple of months. So be very aware of what kind of tasks you're doing and when you stop learning. When you feel like you stop learning, start asking questions, start having open conversations with the owners and see if you could do other things. Because the last thing you want to do, especially early on in your career, is stop learning. You always want to continue learning. So when you do stop learning, you've reached out to the owners and you realize like these guys are not going to help me continue my learning journey, that's a really good indicator that you should be looking elsewhere. As a matter of fact, you should never stop looking, which is why I said always maintain that open conversation with your colleagues, because you want to see what everybody else is up to. You know, a lot of times we're made to believe that by us staying quiet and just doing our job, not asking questions, going home, not causing a ruckus, you know, that we're doing the right thing. And we might be doing the right thing for others, but we're not doing the right things for ourselves. So in order to do the right thing for ourselves, we need to continue to learn, continue to keep asking questions. And if that bothers other people, then that's a really good indicator that you're not in the right place. So once you've been working for X amount of time at a small firm as a new employee, and you feel like you've stopped learning, it's time to look elsewhere. And my advice there is to switch over to a larger size firm. So let's talk a little bit about the medium and the large. I think that obviously a medium is like, you know, the small firm would be like just really cold, and the large firm would be like really hot, and the medium firm is kind of just right. Of course, this is very general information. You might find that a larger firm suits you better, but ideally you want to have experience across all three. Now, let's say that you are thinking between going to a large firm and a medium-sized firm. I don't think there's a wrong answer there, guys, but what I wanted to say, the reason why I think that the medium size is just right is because a medium-sized firm tends to still have like their niche product, right? Like they're still working with their niche clients, but they might still experiment a little bit more. For example, if you're working at a high-end residential firm that's a medium-sized firm, you might notice that they're still going for other types of projects as well, and that keeps you learning. Like a lot of times larger firms do one kind of project, and a lot of times small firms do one kind of project. Again, this is very general information. It's not 100% right. Medium firms, they are neither here nor there. So a lot of times you'll notice that they're experimenting a little bit more with the kind of projects that they take. A great thing about working at a medium-sized firm that you don't have exposure to in a small firm is the amount of connections that you're making. So you might have like 5 or 6 different project managers that are working each on 2 or 3 different projects. And you can go up to these project managers and you can have conversations about these projects and ask questions. So at a small firm, you might have 1 or 2 partners, you know, the business owners, and they're probably busy trying to get more work or to design existing projects that they're on. And then you might have another drafter or 2, and maybe someone that does admin work, right? So it's a small group. Everybody's busy. Everybody's trying to, you know, finish their own tasks. You might not have people that have all the time in the world for you, right? Whereas a medium-sized firm and a large-sized firm, you have more people at your fingertips that you can go and pick their brains. Now, the larger the firm, the less of a chance of a connection that you're going to have with the actual people on top. So in other words, the smaller the firm, the bigger the connection you're going to have with everybody around you, but the less the less of a connection that you're going to have with a lot of people in general. Which is another reason why at the beginning of the video I said there's no wrong answer. If you're just starting out and you pick a mid-size or a large size firm, even though you might be having a harder time learning just because you're stuck doing one specific thing, the beautiful thing about it is that you have so many people around you that you can ask so much questions and you can network from the beginning. So if you are new to architecture and you just landed your first job at a mid-sized or large-sized firm, make sure that you're making connections with these guys. If you're using LinkedIn, go ahead and add them on LinkedIn. Even if you're not using LinkedIn and you have a profile there, it doesn't matter. Just add everybody that you meet if they're comfortable with it, so that you can use these resources at your disposal later. So going back to the difference between medium, large, and small, another reason why I say that it's important if you're just starting out to start at a small firm is because even though you have more resources, more people around you at the larger firms, when you're new, you don't know what are the questions you should ask, right? So you might have all this knowledge and all this information around you, but you just don't know how to use it. You don't know how to apply it. So what's the point of having it? That's the reason why I say focus on having a small firm as your first job first, if possible, okay? Now, if you're at one, right, and you're happy, I think you should continue to work there for as long as possible, as long as you're learning, as I said before. But if you're not happy, or let's say I wanted to offer you some general advice, something that I would offer myself as if I was brand new, right? What I would say is this: whenever you start working at a firm, pretend that your time there is finite. Now, you don't have to think of a specific amount of time, but you could if you want to. You could say, I just started working at this small firm. I'm going to be here a year max. If new opportunities present themselves at this firm, then I'll stay longer. I might extend that by like 6 months to a year. If I'm not learning, if nothing really changes, then after a year, I'll switch to a medium-sized company or a large-sized company. The idea is to cover all your bases. The idea is to try to hit the small, the medium, and the large before making your final, quote unquote, final decision. Now, the final decision is by the time you've hit all of these three, you're at a pretty good place to decide what you want for your later stages of your career, which is, do you want to own your own company, right? Or do you want to be a top position at one of these really big, well-known firms? Or possibly you found like a really small boutique niche firm that you want to be a part of, and that's your goal. The thing is, you can't really make this decision when you're first starting out or even a few years in, because you really don't know. You might think that you want to work for one of these really, really, really big architects, but then you start working at a medium-sized firm and you realize, man, this is actually my passion. I like this small group right here that I'm working with, and this is what I want to do. So in other words, you want to get as much information as you possibly can, as fast and as early as you can in your career. Now, let's talk to you, some of you guys out there who are not brand new. Maybe you've been working for 10 or 15 years. Maybe you've only had exposure to 2 firms, or maybe you've only had exposure to 1 firm. In other words, your exposure is limited. What do? Guys, I give you the same advice. You have to keep on looking what's out there. If your company is treating you right, then by all means, stay there. If you're still learning, I'll say that 1,000 times if I have to. But by the time that you realize like, hey, this firm is not for me, it's usually too late. And then you start feeling like overwhelmed, like I want to get out of here. And you should never feel that. You should always have an exit strategy. In business, when you purchase some property and you're trying to make a profit out of it, you always have exit strategies, multiple exit strategies. In other words, you don't want to be stuck here with your hands in your pockets when everything around you is crumbling. You want to know exactly how you're going to get out, same way that you want to know how you're going to get in. So it's worth, guys, planning your future a little bit better than you are. A lot of times we'll sit there and we'll kind of like let fate guide us, and that's all fine and dandy. Like, we don't have to sit there and try to force what our future is going to look like. But I personally think that it's really good to have a general layout of what you want your life to look like with some actionable steps. In other words, like I mentioned before, if you're going to be at a firm, call it 1 year that you're going to be there before calling out. What does that do? That does something to you subconsciously. And what it does is that it kind of, first of all, it makes you feel better on stressful days, that you're thinking like, well, this is just a stepping stone in my career. If you're just working thinking you're going to be there indefinitely, then there's going to be stressful days and you're going to feel like, man, I'm stuck here. I hate my job. I hate this career, blah, 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 blah. But if you think of every choice that you make as a stepping stone, and it's part of like a structure that you've created, like an actual curriculum, if you will, of your life, then you'll see like, wait a minute, this is just a class, right? Like back in college, this is just a class and I might not like it, but once I learn enough from it and take that test at the end, I'll pass the class and I'll move on. And that's the way that you should think about it. Now, another option is, and this goes for everybody, brand new guys, or some of you guys that have been here working in architecture for 10, 15 years, whatever, maybe something you've thought about is, well, I've already tried the medium firm, I've already tried the large, the small. What about working on my own? This is going to be a whole separate video, and I've touched upon this on all my other videos. So, be sure to check those out, and be sure to subscribe if you like these kind of conversations, because I dive really deep into each specific topic. So I don't want to blend too much into that right now, what I'm about to talk to, but I'm going to give you a little bit of information on it, which is comparing your own company versus the small, the medium, and the large. Guys, it's very, very different working for yourself than working for a company. When you're working at a company, you don't really have to worry too much, except making sure that you're finishing your tasks, making sure that your tasks are, they're done well, and making sure that you maintain positive connection with those around you. That's pretty much it. Things like raises and things like that, that's all part of the game. But they're kind of like indirect, right? Most directly is you figuring out how you're going to get to work, staying at work, and then doing your work, and then going home. That's pretty much it. When you're working for yourself, guys, it's a lot more complicated because you're thinking about getting new projects. How do you get your project? How do you reach out to clients? So like marketing and stuff like that. Drafting your proposals. When you draft your proposals, you got to have some like legal information in there, like how you draft your proposals, like what are you going to be in charge of, what your scope is going to be, making sure that parties sign what needs to be signed, doing the work accurately. So once you have so you're basically focusing on getting new clients, you're focusing on keeping those clients, you're focusing on making sure that you're profitable. You're logging in your hours, you're basically seeing what the overall health of all your projects is, what the overall health of your company is. And at the same time, you're trying not to work 1,000 hours a week, right? So there's a lot more that you have to be worried about. If you're running your own company, you're actually in charge of everything. And so try to think about this before you make the change into working for yourself. Try to think about, like, almost in your mind, simulate what the experience will be of you being a sole proprietor. Like, envision yourself grabbing a client, right? Envision yourself grabbing a client and what needs to be done. And you can simulate like a small experience. You can simulate like doing a renovation. So let's say that you got a job. How'd you find that client? Question number one. Question number two, how do you bring that client over? Like, how do you make him trust you that you're going to do this job right? Right? So you got that part. After that, how do you set up how you're going to get paid, when you're going to get paid, and how much you're going to get paid, right? How do you know? Like, are you going to charge this client 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 1,000? Like, how do you know? All right. Now you got the job. What jurisdiction is it? Are you familiar with the local codes, right? Are you going to have to know what setbacks are for this specific project? Are you going to have to submit a site plan for this specific project? Like, what are the deliverables? How long is it going to take you guys? Is this going to take you a week? Is this going to take you a month? Does the client understand this, right? These are all questions that you need to be asking yourself. Then after the fact, once you are actually working on the project, do you know how to detail it, right? The client wants to change all windows on the exterior, by the way. Are you going to need a structural engineer? Who's he going to contract with? Is he going to contract with you? Is he going to contract with the client, right? What information does the structural engineer need to provide? What's his turnaround time? Guys, so many questions that when you work at a firm, you don't really care about. Like, at a firm, you're picking and choosing certain things. Like if you're doing CA, construction administration, and you're doing RFIs, you're worried about that one RFI. You close it out. You're not really concerned with anything else. That's up to the project manager if you're not the project manager. But in real life, you're worried about everything. Whatever's on that proposal, right, as part of your scope, you're worried about everything. Like, that has to get done. So I say this because if you guys are working right now, whether you're at a small firm, large firm, medium-sized firm, think about these questions. Like, simulate these scenarios in your head often. That's actually going to make your job so much more fun, because a lot of times when you're working at a whatever size firm, you're going to be doing one task and it might be boring, right? Because it just feels like there's nothing for you to concern yourself about with this specific task. Like, you're just focused on completing the task. So start to simulate these scenarios, write down these questions in like a journal, keep them forever, and try to answer these questions for each project that you're on, right? Ask a lot of whys, and make sure you're talking to your project managers and business owners about these questions, and try to pretend that these projects are yours when you're working at a small firm or a medium-sized firm or any firm. Just try to make sure that these projects, like, make them feel like they're your actual projects, like you care about them, because this is all on you. That's going to make you way more curious. It's going to make you learn more. And then if you do ever decide to go to your own firm, like open up your own firm, guys, you guys are going to be way ahead of the game. I promise you. A lot of the stuff you can learn on your own. I mean, I certainly have learned most of this stuff on my own. But if I would have had this mentality when I was working at the small firms or the mid-sized firms, if I would have had this mentality of knowing what kind of questions to ask, man, I would have like so much information to use right now. My life would be so much easier. But anyway, I didn't want to run this video too much more. So if you feel like I missed anything specifically on the topics that I discussed in the project, or if you feel like there's something that maybe I briefly touched upon, but you think like, man, that deserves its own 20-minute video, guys, let me know down in the comments. I don't know if you guys have realized this, but this is my 4th day in a row in one single week of me talking about like the business side of architecture. So if you have any questions at all, doesn't matter how silly the question is, make sure you ask down in the comments. I'll respond to you with by answering your actual question. But if your question requires like an in-depth video, guys, I'll be more than happy to do this for you guys. So as always, take care, everyone. Good luck on all your architectural future endeavors. Peace out.